Welcome to Lox and Company Limited. I'm your host, The Godfather, and today we're going to talk about our newest graphic t-shirt, Pretended Patriotism. Let's get unloxed. So let's talk about the design of Pretended Patriotism. So we'll start with the basics. So we have the basics is the color. It's called vintage black. And then on the left sleeve is going to be our locksman spade printed on there in gold, which is kind of standard now for all of our graphic t-shirts. But so we move into the actual design now. Let's start with the soldier. So we've got the soldier, this continental soldier wearing a tricorn hat. It's actually called a cocked hat. And it's because the three sides of the hat are turned up or cocked. In the military, they would wear an emblem or a cockade on the front. Of course, in this design, we've included the spade, just a cool little detail. Back in those days in the 1800s, everyone wore a tricorn hat, so it was not, the hat itself actually would designate class, social class, but that's based on the type of material or fur or animal skin that the hat itself was made of. But everybody wore the tricorn hat, and in the military it was common to wear the tricorn hat. Moving on from the tricorn hat, we have the wig. Again, wigs were very common back in the day, and wigs were also distinguished social classes based on the type of hair and material that the wigs were made of, which is another reason why people like the tricorn hat, because it actually revealed their wig. And it's just kind of like, people driving around with, new cars these days. They want people to look at the car. Well, the wigs and the hats were the same way back in those days. Moving on from, actually, let's stay there for a second. You can notice in this design that the hat is tilted up. So this was common for soldiers because when they would carry the rifles on their left shoulder while they're marching, the hat would be out of their way. So just a cool little detail that, you'd think it was a little tilted just for style, but it actually had a purpose. Moving on to the actual uniform now. The Continental soldier wore blue. This is called a regimental coat. People ask, why were the uniforms blue? I think the most easiest answer is, well, it'd be really confusing if they wore red. So obviously they fought the red coats, and so it needed to be a different color than red. A lot of veterans showed up in the War of 1776, the Independence War. A lot of veterans showed up from the colonies wearing their uniforms that they wore in the French and Indian War, which were blue. Also, if you remember, what was his name? Baron von Steuben. He was Prussian. He helped train the Continental soldiers in preparation for battle. And so the Prussian uniform was blue too, and some people think he had some sway over the blue uniform. Ultimately, it was up to George Washington, the commander-in-chief, and he requested from the Continental Congress the uniforms be made blue. So they're blue. So let's move into the other details of the shirt. So we talked about the hat, the wig, the soldier, the uniform. Below the soldier is the sword here. It's actually a replica of George Washington's sword. George Washington's war sword, to be exact. It was a Kudo design, K-U-T-O. Kudo swords were typically shorter, but since George was a big and tall fella, his was actually made a little bit longer than average Kudo swords. If you look at the detail in the hilt, it was actually ivory hilt painted green, and it had a silver cross piece with alternating curves. What you see on the shirt is exactly a replica of what George Washington's war sword is, or was. So that was a pretty cool detail. We wanted it in the design. Of course, wrapped around the flag, the sword itself is the Betsy Ross flag, which has 13 stars representing the 13 colonies. A lot of cool stuff about the Betsy Ross flag. It was, made in Philadelphia. It was commissioned by George Washington himself with other people on the committee too. But just a cool throwback to our heritage and our history. And then lastly, of course, the name of the t-shirt, Pretended Patriotism. We have the quote that goes around the entire design, and it is a quote George Washington said, which was, "Guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism." And we shorten that briefly, but guard against pretended patriotism is the message there. George Washington was no stranger to pretended patriotism or phony patriots. Thomas Paine called them summer soldiers, sunshine patriots. We call them today fair weather fans. The people root for the team when they're doing really well, and then you don't hear anything about them when they're not. Very similar concept here. Back in the day, in the 1700s, 1800s, when we were fighting the war, and even after the war. And it holds true today too. We got phony patriots, pretended patriotism, all around us. Unfortunately, freedom is never one generation away, as Ronald Reagan had stated, which was pretty cool. That is not the quote of the day, which is actually a good segment into the quote of the day. Today's quote of the day is, "Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the more difficult the conflict, the more glorious the triumph." Thomas Paine said that. A little cool thing about Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine was with George Washington and his troops in 1776 in the cold, harsh winter, if you remember. And if you don't, I'll just briefly tell you. It was during that time that the cause, the rebellion, our independence was hanging in the balance, and we're actually very, very close to defeat. Thomas Paine wrote those words in an article called "The American Crisis," and they were just stirring words. George Washington liked those words so much that he actually commanded them be read to his entire army. And get this, 3 days later, on Christmas Day, George Washington and his troops crossed the Delaware River and killed a whole bunch of Hessians in the Battle of Trenton. And shortly after that, the tide of war started to change in our favor. So just incredible. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now, but it's just a great history lesson. Just remember, words carry more weight than just letters put together in a fancy order. Hey, fun fact about this design. When we started to design this, it was actually pre-COVID. And what we had done was we took the Betsy Ross flag and we made a bandana and wrapped it around the guy's face. Just thought it was kind of a cool way to hide his identity and just make him look more savage. And then, of course, with the outbreak of the pandemic and such, we decided that the mask was not a good idea to promote. So we moved it, we took it off his face, and we put it on the sword. So that's just a fun fact. And you can check out the design. I'll put it up on the screen. Hey, like, share, subscribe if you like this today's segment of Unloxed. I am curious, though, as a man of details, what is your favorite detail of pretended patriotism? Comment below and let me know. Stay sharp, stay savage. Godfather out.